Hello, my name is Debbie Boone, and I want to welcome you to my podcast, The Bend, where we explore how successful people navigated the path and emerged in a better place when life threw them an unexpected twist. It's inspired by one of my favorite sayings: the bend in the road is not the end of the road unless you fail to make the curve. These conversations will hopefully help you and inspire you to embrace your personal bend and to flourish. I hope you enjoy it, and if you need help with your own personal navigation and you're in veterinary medicine, please feel free to reach out to me at Debbie Boone 2 Manage Vets Consulting. Enjoy the bend and be inspired by our wonderful guest. Welcome. Well, hello everyone, and welcome to today's episode of The Bend. My name is Debbie Boone. And this is our podcast where we shine a little light on some innovators and disruptors and change makers who are bending the profession of veterinary medicine to the better. I am a speaker, trainer, and consultant to veterinary teams. And on the Bend, I'll talk with leaders who are shifting mindsets and kind of breaking the molds and designing a more compassionate, sustainable, and forward-thinking veterinary world. So today I have with me a guest, Dr. Meghan Burns. Now, I met her through Vet Partners, which many of you know is the Association of Consultants and Advisors to the Veterinary Profession. And she was a member, and that's when we met. And then she wrote something really interesting a couple weeks ago for the Fountain Report. And I went, oh, I need to talk to Meghan and get her on the Bend because this was so interesting to me. And we're going to talk a little bit about that. But just to give you a little bit of background, so Dr. Meghan Burns she graduated from Michigan State, and then she went to Columbia and worked with strategic marketing. She went from there to work for Marielle, so companies that we will recognize as their veterinary pharmacovigilance manner. That word I don't know how you could shorten that word any, but it needs to happen. Then she went to Verbac as their technical marketing manager, and then is it LARDA? Is that it? LARDA Institute? Did I pronounce it correctly? Okay. As their principal advisor. And so there she helped startups with getting their strategic plan, what their pitch was going to be, how they could raise money. And then she said, well, you know what? I'm really good at this, so I might as well start my own business, which the entrepreneur spirit bit her. And so now she is an independent entrepreneur, and she helps clients get the science out of their data, which I love because that's really kind of how I got my started in my own practice, was parsing out information from data that when we were first being challenged by Pet Med Express, like where was our revenue going? And that's how I got started with that. But she also helps integrate that into their marketing and in their campaigns so that they stand out within the industry as thought leaders and that they increase their sales, which is what marketing is all about. So currently she works as a fractional veterinary growth strategist. So Meghan Burns, thank you very much for joining me today on The Bend. I appreciate it.
Well, I appreciate you having me.
Yeah. So I always like to get people to tell their origin story because sometimes we, like me, I always wanted to be a veterinarian. This was, the thing. Obviously, I did not, but I still stayed in the profession for a lot longer than most veterinarians, I think, just because I've been doing it 45 years. So tell me about you. Were you one of those kids who always wanted to be a vet, or just, maybe the science geek who loved it?
Yeah, no, I honestly wanted to be a marine biologist first. I think a lot of, young girls in the time period that I grew up in wanted to be a marine biologist. As I grew up and got older, got more experience, kind of redialed in what I was looking to do, which was spend more time with the animals. And now I do marketing. So we all know how that turned out, right? I went hard left and then took a hard right. So
there you go. There you go. Well, as someone who lives at the ocean, I really appreciate your interest in marine biology. Probably a mutual friend of ours, Alicia Mages, who is an RVT and does a lot of training in our world, also started out as a marine biology. That was her interest. So from marine stuff into animal health, it's not a far stretch. It's not really. Just eliminate some water. That's it. All right. So, tell me what inspired you in your profession. I mean, started out and when they went to veterinary school, and but you never really kind of went the clinical path of going into GP, and then because then you went to work for a pharmaceutical company. And how did
Hmm.
you make that transition? I know a lot of people are interested in industry work. Was it all that you thought it was going to be?
Yes and no.
Yeah.
So yeah, no, I started in regulatory affairs and in pharmacovigilance, as you stated, right? And then say pharmacovigilance 5 times fast. But I started there in corporate animal health, and that really taught me about how risk really works. And then over time, found my passion for marketing and helping companies to commercialize their products. So I realized most growth problems weren't marketing problems; they were really alignment problems between demand, operations, and economics. And that's really where my work now lives.
Hmm. Yeah. Well, in thinking about maybe our audience is probably all over the spectrum. We have some people who are working in clinics, and then some industry people, and all over. So, talk a little bit about what that looks like in the practice. I mean, you're saying there's a disconnect between. I think a lot of times I think about the some of the things that came across my desk, and that the sales reps would come in and they go, "This is the latest and the greatest thing," and I'd go, but this. And they go, oh, because they hadn't thought about that. So there's a
Mhm.
perspective from inside the practice that sometimes is missing in the marketing of pharmaceutical sales. The disconnect between what the marketing team is thinking is a valid point out, and then it getting into the practice, and then the practicality of the teams in practice using the information that they're provided to actually convince the client. I think there's a disconnect there. Is that what you're talking about?
Yes, and I've actually seen that in real life, where I think a lot of companies, and I've been in companies where that were guilty of this, where you put together these bright shining brochures for the veterinarian to try to help them make a decision as to what product to use for which patient, and you think it's self-explanatory, and then you put it in front of a veterinarian and they still give you the deer in the headlights look, saying, well, I still don't understand which of your products is used for this use case. So I think a lot of times, having marketing teams out regularly doing ride-alongs, or having a good rapport with some of their local clinics to go in and or even do focus groups where they can kind of battle test some of their materials, so that when after they spend all of that money and time putting those materials together, that they don't fall flat like
Yeah.
I've seen in person
Yeah,
before.
I agree with you. One of the things that sticks in my mind many, many years ago when I was managing hospitals is I was part of the key opinion leaders and for Novartis Animal Health. And I remember them bringing me in and a veterinarian who was local and saying, "Look at all this that we're thinking of presenting to you." And I went, if you brought this into me, I would immediately go, I don't have time for that. It was a binder. It was pages and pages of material. And I said, we're busy. We don't have time to go through 15 pages of documentation just for you to sit in my office and try to sell me a product, because it's not going to work. I said, make it one page, make it bullet points, make it clear, and then how it's going to benefit my patient, and then we'll talk about it. And so they actually fired the marketing company and got somebody local. And I went, well, okay, I didn't really mean for that to happen, but they would have spent a whole lot of money for nothing, because it would have just immediately shut down their customer. And I feel like that is a big point that we can use, not just in big companies like you're talking about, but even within our practices. We need to ask the customer. We're not talking to our client and asking the customer. And as a marketing person, what are your thoughts about that?
No, I mean, absolutely. I've seen, especially on the clinic side, where they have documentation that's maybe, like you said, too long, that it's not as succinct as it needs to be. It's not as clear as it needs to be. And, there's a lot of clients you can, like I said, battle test that material with. Hey, is this coming across the way we're intending it?
Mhm.
Or is it off-putting, as a potential client coming into the practice?
Mhm.
So I think there's a lot of ways to, really leverage your, top 20% of your clients to really say, hey, how do you feel about this? Because
Yeah.
they're your biggest fans, so they're going to give you honest feedback.
Yeah, if you ask them, if you ask them, they will. Sometimes I think we're afraid to ask. Do you think that's true? That we're afraid of the answer?
Right, or being judged. I think, yeah,
Yeah.
I think, veterinarians and, people in veterinary practice are often very much introverts, and, I think, yeah, I think that's definitely a,
Yeah.
a risk they see.
Yeah. Well, coming back to your business, I mean, I feel like there's a lot of people out there, and we did ask this question in our recent annual meeting at Vet Partners. It's like, how many of you are seeing that there is an uptake in new practices that are entrepreneurs, veterinarians are doing startups, and 150 people in that group who are all consultants and advisors and lawyers and CPAs said, yes, we are seeing that. So let's talk a little bit about starting a business and being an entrepreneur and taking the leap from, there's a safety in a job working for a big company like that and jumping into the fire of entrepreneurship. How did you plan that? How did you think about that? What was your strategy?
Well, this may shock a lot of people, but I didn't have a huge, drawn out business plan. I knew I had a lot of skills that I acquired over my time in different, various corporate roles, and I knew I had a lot of value to the add to the industry. And I really leaned on my network heavily. And so that's really how, my business began, largely, helping the corporates that I previously was employed by, out the gate. And now it's taken a whole another arc since then. Um, so, I mean, yeah, there was no big drawn out plan. It was just
Yeah.
sort of, I took the leap and haven't looked back.
There you go. Well, the same thing here is sometimes necessity is the mother of invention. And during the 2008-9 recession, I got laid off, and my husband just said, do it. Everybody's asking you all the time. You might as well just go ahead and do consulting because you always wanted to. And I went, really? And he said, yeah, couldn't be a better time. Might as well. And I said, okay, let's do that. And here we are. But did you face some obstacles? What challenges did you run across that you were maybe unexpected in the business startup world?
It's been just over 10 years in business now, and so it's hard to think back too far, but I mean, just, everything that you don't think about, from a business license to a website to a logo. I mean, sort of all the little small things that really, especially for somebody that's in marketing, really have to be on point.
Mhm.
So I think it's a lot of little things, but I think if you don't get bogged down too much in the business, you have the opportunity to work on the business. I think
Mhm.
is that's the largest, lesson I've learned over time, is really being able to grow the business by spending more time on it instead of in it every
Mhm.
day.
Yeah. And you mentioned networking, and I always like to talk about the value of networking because we are kind of an introverted society in our veterinary space. I mean, I can't even tell you how many resumes I looked at that the people said, well, I like animals better than humans. And I went, we have a problem because this is a human-facing business. That being said, what advice would you give people who are not naturally extroverted to go out and create these connections? Because I mean, as I will agree with you 100% that connections have made my business flourish, and it is who I know. And
I think also networking gives you a lot of perspective, because I think veterinary medicine at times can feel very insular, and exposures to operators, investors, and innovators, shaped how I see risk, growth, and opportunity. So I think there's a tremendous value in networking, and I think it's something, that you grow and develop and get better at over time.
yeah. And I feel like the other part of that is even for small practice owners who are thinking, well, I'm just a veterinarian here. I'm just running and working in my practice, and people are going to come in the door. But I know from my own experience that my practice owner was incredibly involved in the community
Mhm.
and was involved in Rotary and all kinds of other things. And we actually helped our city build a trail from Greensboro to High Point in an abandoned train track and did the marketing for it. It was called Battleground Effort to Save the Trail Best. battleground effort to save the trail. And that became such a project that this trail is more than 30 miles long. So then he planted with his Rotary over 1 million trees in our county. Yeah. So those are the kind of things that also connected us to clients who said, "Oh, I planted trees with Steve. Let me come to the practice." And it was all about connection. So even as a practice owner, um, getting out into the world and doing some networking matters. Now, before we get too far down this path, I really want to talk about the article that you wrote in the Fountain Report. So, for those of you who don't know, the Fountain Report is a business magazine within animal health. It talks a lot, just not about like veterinary economics, but big picture animal health, the big pharmaceutical companies, and the picture of the entire animal health and pharma world rather than just, inside small animal practice. So Megan wrote an article talking about the some patterns that she was seeing and things that she thinks that people are missing. And I'm like going, yes, 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 yes. So let's talk a little bit about that from your vantage point across the independent practices that you work with and corporate animal health. What are you seeing that people who are just staying in their little lane might miss? Because you're seeing big picture stuff on both sides of that aisle.
Yeah, definitely seeing a lot of patterns, and I see a lot of the same issues in both environments, and people may be surprised by that. But I think misalignment between demand, operations, and economics is certainly an issue. Independent veterinary practices see that as stress, whereas corporates maybe see that as margin compression. And it's the same math, it's just on a different scale.
Mhm. Mhm. So, what's the biggest misconception that practice owners have about growth right now? Because what we're seeing is that top line is increasing and it's steadily increasing, but we're also seeing visits down. Is that across the board what you're seeing too?
Yes, yes. And I think the biggest misconception there is that growth solves that instability. And sometimes, like in that example, it even hides it.
Hmm.
If retention is soft or, capacity is strained, adding more demand just amplifies that friction.
Hmm. Hmm. So I want to talk about retention because I am a huge proponent of keeping your clients because they become much easier. And as a marketing person, it's expensive to go and find new people, right?
Hmm.
So how do we retain the people that we have? What are our best tools to retain clients?
I think there's a lot of different things practices can do, and it's incentivizing the top 20% of your clientele that largely makes up 80% of your revenue. Incentivizing those folks to be your raving fans, whether they do that on social media or to their friends, and really keeping those folks on a regular cadence,
Mhm.
communicating with them regulatory, woo,
Yeah.
regularly. And I think it's also a consistent level of experience, right? From what they see online to social media and experience in the clinic, right? It's all a very consistent, look and feel to the practice experience, in terms of handoff from, CSRs to the front to the technical staff and the veterinarian. So I think that's a lot of the ways, practices today can retain their clients.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and a lot of times when I go in as a consultant, my practice owners will, one of the first things they ask is, how can we get more clients? And then I reverse that and say, well, what are you doing to keep the ones you have?
Right.
Because you're right, that top 20%. And there's been some new data that's recently come out that only 25% of our clients are currently current on preventative care. So 75% of them are between 4 and 6 months behind, and those clients we certainly don't want to just throw away, but we have to understand that those are not the clients that are keeping our doors open, especially if they're stretching out care. And all of that has to do with a lot of cost. I want to circle back because, having just taken Tucker, who is always here on my lap, to the vet last week. And I'm one of those pet owners that keeps all their invoices, right? So I can go back but I have an ulterior motive in here too. But just in looking at my own invoices, in his first visit to the vet, the exam was $52, and then it jumped up to $69, and this time it's $75. And that looks like we have growth, right? Because the bottom line. But what are we actually seeing in profitability when we get into, the other side of that coin? Because you can drive a lot of revenue and still not make any money.
Exactly. And going back to your point on new client numbers, if those new client numbers look good, but your team feels more strained and revenue feels less stable, that's a signal.
Mhm.
Volume can be up, but durability may be down.
Yeah. Well, and that was what really I loved in the article in the Fountain Report, because I think people don't really look at that as a key performance indicator of their practice. What they tend to look at is maybe the revenue per DVM, their per case average. They look at their top line, they look at the profitability. But if you're constantly churning clients and you don't have a retention, or they're all bonded to one veterinarian who works in the hospital, you've got a big problem when it comes
Mm.
time to sell your practice. Is that what I mean, that was the premise of a lot of what you were talking about in that Fountain Report article. Can you expand on that a little bit for us? What is that, what are you seeing out there in the world?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, for veterinarians looking to, sell their practice, what should they do differently this year? I think they need to focus less on chasing growth and more on stabilizing that retention. Tighten the recall, strengthen the compliance, and make revenue more repeatable. Buyers don't just buy size, they buy visibility. And I've also seen that with a lot of solo practitioners or even two vet practices that, the primary DVM has trouble shifting clients to their associate.
Mhm.
And, it does jeopardize their ability to sell the practice if everyone is married to the primary DVM or
Mhm.
the primary owner.
Yeah. It's a little flattering if you're the primary DVM, right? To have everybody want you and ask for you. But having grown up in a practice that went from two doctors to three doctors to four doctors to five doctors, one of the things that I used to teach my CSRs was every new client gets a new doctor, because we don't want to give them to the practice owner unless they specifically ask that they have some kind of connection there, because they don't have a relationship yet. And we want to build a relationship with everybody on the team. And that starts at the front desk and not just the medical team or the DVM. And that's a more valuable, saleable practice. Is that correct?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think to your point, I think it's an under recognized issue that CSR is also essentially your brand in the clinic.
Hmm.
I mean, they're the gatekeeper. They pull a lot of weight within the practice, and I think sometimes that's not appreciated as
Yes.
much as it should be.
Yes, I agree. I was on an interesting call a couple of days ago with a friend of mine, Brendan Brashears, and Brendan is a marketing person, and he was doing a little, I guess, recon on a practice that had done a lot of kind of expensive marketing out, Google ads, things like that. And then they were getting 300 calls a month coming in, potential, new client, and only 3% of those were getting booked into an appointment. And then he started to research what the CSRs were saying to people. And
Mhm.
that was that they were telling people that they didn't have availability when there was openings in the schedule. Maybe they just didn't want to go to work at 4:30. They wanted to get out early and things like that. Um, People were calling saying, "Do you care for cats?" And they would just say, "Yes." Yes. Like, oh no, I was horrified. As somebody who trains CSRs, I was like, this is just terrible. But those are the kind of things I think practice owners and managers are missing in their practices. They're not listening to these things. What would you suggest that they listen to or do or observe or measure when it comes to that kind of thing?
Yeah, I mean, I think listening to call recordings is great, or even, kind of, standing off to the side and listening to the client interactions and really reinforcing what the team can improve on, and also giving them kudos for what they did well, right? And a lot of times too, you don't know in that interaction if maybe that was if that was a client that was a little bit, maybe short with the CSR, and, this is like the 10th person they've had to deal with that wasn't as pleasant as maybe they could be. And I think so there's a lot of grace to that as well, because they do, take a lot of, let's just call it what it is, abuse on the phone.
Mhm.
And so I think that does weigh on people. And so giving them a proper outlet for that as well, I think is an appreciation for, being the first line of defense, if you
Hmm.
will, as well.
Yeah, and they're the
Yeah,
last impression that walks out the door too. So if they,
right.
I've often talked to salespeople, and of course, with your connection with pharmaceutical companies, I'm sure you've had the same thing. Your salespeople have said the same thing to you: is they have listened to CSRs actually undermine the recommendations of their veterinarians
Hmm.
and send them down to things like Tractor Supply or Walmart or Petco or whatever to buy products or to, whatever it was that they were getting a little pushback. And I feel like a lot of times that's just trying to be helpful. And I
Hmm.
appreciate that we want to help people, but we also have to realize that we don't know about those products. We don't know how their storage is. We don't know if they're the same quality as what we have. And then, we haven't been in that exam room while that doctor was educating that client. And so our job really at that front desk is to support the message rather than undermine the message. And so this is why it's important that you buy these products from us, because we actually know where they came from. We know that they work, and that kind of thing. Um, so Megan, I mean, when do practice owners typically call you?
Well, I mean, usually it's when the revenue looks okay, but something feels off. We've talked a lot about it today. The team is strained at different points in the, in the client journey, and retention definitely feels softer in the last few years. Either that, or it's when they're looking to sell and they want to have more control over their numbers and increase their valuation.
Mhm. No, typically, because I will get those same conversations. I want to sell my practice next year. Don't wait. When I work with startups, what I'll tell them is like, you start planning the sale of your practice the day you unlock the door, because this is all going to build up over time. The clients that you retain, the reputation that you develop, the culture in your hospital, and those are all saleable items. The culture in your hospital is something that is valuable, and it's not just how many clients you have and how much revenue you have, but is my team going to stay?
Mhm.
Are the clients going to stay with the team? Am I going to have to, have a complete meltdown when I take over and everybody's going to abandon me, and then, there's no revenue coming in. So all those things are really important as far as the sale goes. What would you recommend, like the least amount of time to get a practice ready for sale?
Least amount of time. Without necessarily knowing exactly where we're starting with,
Mhm.
a meaning how far in the black. I would say, I think just to your point, because the team is part of that sale and the valuation, I think the longer you give people to understand the transition, to me, the better. I would say 3 years, but
Mhm.
what's your opinion on that,
I
Debbie?
would say the same thing. I would
Yeah.
say at least 3 years, because the first year is discovery and kind of getting new systems in place, and getting people to change their behavior is very challenging, as all consultants know. And all managers know too. But and then the other part of it is now you're building it up, right? You're also, and I know we see this as consultants when we go in, you quit fudging things, right? You quit paying for your kid who doesn't work there. You quit buying things that are not pertinent to the practice. And I always remember one of my friends who was a CPA said, I had a practice owner expense a guitar, a $17,000 guitar. in his profit and loss statement. And somebody else who was a small animal practitioner wrote off a tractor. You don't have a tractor in the middle of a small animal practice. But anyway, so they get really creative, but all people who do evaluations know that and they go in and they normalize that stuff. But if you are so creative in your accounting, let's call it that, then a buyer won't trust the numbers even when you present the numbers to them. So that is part of the cleanup too, is you've got to make sure the numbers are legit so that
Mhm.
people can actually trust them and be willing to pay for something that you have presented as, having this amount of value. So what's one small change that you've seen that really kind of makes a big difference?
From a small change perspective, I think clarifying who your best clients actually are and designing that experience around that, that single shift improves retention, compliance, and margin all at the same time. And, in my business, we like to look at, you know, ideal client types and avatars for the doctors and really get them to focus on the medicine they want to practice and have that throughout the whole client journey, like I said, from online to in the clinic. And I think that really, improves the well-being of the practice. I think when, clinics and veterinarians get to practice the medicine they want on the client types, for example, if they like surgery, if they more really like, internal medicine or feline medicine, if those clients are coming in the door, that keep them engaged, keep them interested, and, this is another thing we haven't hit on yet, but we probably should, appropriately utilize their staff to
Yes.
help and assist them with those clients. Um, I think it's all for the health and well-being of the practice is,
Mhm.
they're
Yeah.
practicing the medicine they want on the clients they want to work with, and the clients are going to listen
Yeah.
and really engage with them.
Yeah. The point that you made here is huge because having done this for a long period of time, I feel like a lot of times veterinarians are just like, well, I have to take everybody. Like everybody is my client, everybody has potential to be my client. And I like you have to decide who you want to be and who you want to
Mhm.
serve because otherwise you might have a client that is what we would call the country club high-end client. And they're going to come into your practice and they're not going to be happy, even though they have the wherewithal, because you're not practicing to the level of care that they think, or the level of through that client journey that they believe they deserve. And then on the other hand, if you are not marketing appropriately, you're going to have people who have little wherewithal who come into your practice who are considered, more like rescue work than a client, then they're not going to be happy because they need something for free and you're not in the free charity business. So they're in the wrong place. And the same thing for the team. That is the other part of this too, is we have a tendency to hire people who have skills, but they have to have skills and believe in our values and be in alignment with our values. Otherwise, there's always a disconnect. And I think sometimes that is, you mentioned it earlier that there is a softening of available staff, that
Mhm.
it seems to be very challenging to keep and retain good people. And when you are desperate for people who have a skill set that you need, it's really hard to find people and then say no to somebody who's not in alignment. And that takes discipline.
Mhm.
And that is very challenging, very challenging. And maybe you can switch them over and get them to play in your ballpark if you are focused yourself on your mission, vision, and values. But sometimes um, people are completely misaligned in practice and they're just growing in the wrong garden. That's all that has to happen. They have to need to move out. Um, so when you are now, do you work with people who do valuations and is that part of what your consulting is?
I have strategic partners that I work with, so I personally am involved in that, but I'm not in the day-to-day operations like
Mhm.
they are. So I have strategic partners that I partner with,
Okay.
that they can help practice owners with that specifically.
Because I mean, this is I call some of these things that we're talking about, as you said, they're a little abstract, right? They just are hard to get your fingers right because we can't pull it out of the PIMS. We don't have those hard data points, or we're not looking for things. What what does it look like? I mean, what are these earnings quality, retention, client culture? What does that look like, and how do you measure that?
So it looks like a predictable schedules, steady compliance, and then clients who come back without you having to chase them, to text them, to send them email reminders. And if your revenue depends on constant replacement, your stress level tells you before the P&L does.
Hmm. Oh
So,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah. I would absolutely agree with that.
Mhm.
Um, do you think that practices are losing clients and they don't even know it?
I think so. And some of the in the practices that I've worked with, and oftentimes they don't even start the chasing process until 18 to 24 months out.
Yeah.
So, they may not always be losing them
Mhm.
outright, but they're losing visit frequency. So as the follow-ups, there's more time between follow-ups and fewer follow-ups,
Hmm.
care is delayed, and compliance becomes more selective.
Hmm.
And so that's to me is what I would call quiet softening, and it definitely impacts revenue.
Yeah, I like that quiet softening because it's a little sneaky, right? People are just it's like a drift. And when people, I guess a lot of times people, well, they came in and got their vaccines. And I said, yeah, but here's what happened. So they came in and they're 4 or 6 months late getting their vaccines. And that pushes them 6 months out. Well, what if they're 6 months late the next time? Well, then that's a whole year of revenue that they missed and a whole year of protection that these animals have missed. And if that continues to happen, then you don't have them on an annual cadence. You have them on a 18-month cadence or a 2-year cadence now. And so they're not as valuable a client to the practice financially as someone who is actually there on schedule and on time, and and their animals obviously are not getting the care that they need either because my practice, I grew up in a AHA accredited, we do prevention, 87% compliance on preventative care, and we would do a reach back if somebody hadn't been in 6 months and they were too late, late for their in 6 months, we would do a reach back and
Mhm.
start calling people. But you're right, sometimes it's a year or 2 years out, or people who've never done it. They've never looked back and say, how many people are overdue that slip through the cracks and that you could call them up in day and say, we're really concerned about your pet because it hasn't been vaccinated according to our records. Now, are our records correct? And that's the other thing I feel like we do is we have a lot of garbage in
Mhm.
our PIMS, and we think we have so many active clients, but they're not really there. They're not really active. Um, so, what's an early warning sign that if you're a practice owner that you should pay attention to when, things are seemingly okay, but not really?
No, I think an early warning sign is if your client numbers look good, but something still feels off. You have open slots on your calendar. Revenue feels less stable. I think going back to the point earlier when volume looks like it's up, but
Hmm.
are you retaining those new clients? Are
Hmm.
and how are you working to achieve that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. The client retention, I think, is huge. And I believe that, during COVID, there was a lot of really skewed data because people were just trying to get into any practice. And then it looked like we had a lot of demand for new clients and that there was, we needed a lot more veterinarians. But I really think we were incredibly inefficient because everybody was running out to the parking lot all the time. And then those people were calling, trying to get into the very first place. And then when they couldn't, they just found somebody and then, but they didn't come back to the new people. Usually they went back to their regular provider. So I think that especially private equity looked at that and said, oh my gosh, this is a glory hole. These people are always recession proof and all these people have this demand. But now we're getting back to what I would consider to be the 2018 normals. in a softer economy, because having done this more than a minute, I have been through four recessions in veterinary medicine. And it looks like they always look the same. We
Mm,
see this same thing where people raise prices in order to maintain, and then we see clients dropping off and compliance spreading out, and we're seeing disaster medicine rather than preventative care, because people have now delayed to the point where, oh, now he's really, really sick, and now we've really got to do something, and it costs a lot more money. I think that that is a really good point to make, that veterinarians need to be paying attention to that. One of the things I think that people don't pay attention to that they should is, where are the clients coming from? Where are they coming from? Are they coming from your marketing? Are they coming from existing clients, referring people? And you can put a lot of marketing out there in the world, but the best marketing in the world, you said it earlier, is a raving fan client base who
mhm.
goes out into the world and goes, you have to come to these people. And that means that you have to give a great experience in the practice. That customer journey has to be stellar. And I had a call not too long ago from a corporate CEO, and he said, here's the things we're thinking about. Revenue soft. Here's the things we're thinking about doing. And one of them was cutting their appointment time to 15 minutes from 30. He said, my doctors won't like it. I said, your clients won't either. I
Mm-mm.
said, this is not the time to cut service. This is the time to amplify service, because you've got to show enough value when people are concerned about cost, when they've gone to the grocery store and things are ridiculously expensive, and you are discretionary revenue, I mean, or income to them. So you've got
Mhm.
to really pay attention to, are you giving them all the experience that they desire, and are you actually asking the customer what they want out there into the world? So do you, as a marketing expert, design like customer surveys and things that where people are actually asking their clients what they want?
Absolutely. And then to your point earlier, you know, thank you for booking an appointment. How did you find us?
Hmm.
And keeping a record of that so that
Yeah.
you know what's working. If you don't have, I mean, there's a lot of, technology out there that can help you do that, but, understanding what marketing that you're doing is working and which is what is really driving the needle.
Hmm. Yeah, I think that, of course, growing up in practice before all this technology was available, we just had a little sheet of paper that said, how did you find us? Referral from a friend. Who was that friend? Yellow pages, because there were yellow pages,
Yeah.
ads, newspaper or whatever, sign on the street, whatever it was. And so we could track it. And that's how we knew that so many of our clients were coming from our existing clients. And then the other part of the marketing is thanking the existing clients for sending people to you. That is a huge,
Hmm.
huge plus, and a great deal of trust by that client in you
Hmm.
to not give their friend, neighbor, relative a bad experience when they come into your practice. So you've got to make sure that you're keeping your game up when those people are coming in. Otherwise, you watch those referrals fall off and you realize there's a problem within your practice for sure. So if you were a practice owner and you were saying, okay, I think I want to sell my practice, what would you do differently starting today, going forward in the next year, 2 years, to really make sure that you were getting the best bang for your buck when it came time to sell your practice to, whether it's, a corporate or a private individual, because we were seeing a lot of those sales happening. Um, what would you do to get your ducks in a row?
I love that question. For me, I would be focusing on making my revenue more repeatable. So focusing less on chasing growth per se and more on stabilizing retention. And then also strengthening compliance, making sure those pet owners are coming in at the cadence they're supposed to for vaccines, for, all of the things we know about. So, um, and like you said, also incentivizing those clients that are recommending us to their friends. so that you're kind of you're also engaging them in that way, right?
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah. And let's not forget to reward the staff when they're answering that phone and they're actually booking appointments and getting those
Right.
people on our books. That's a great way to look at the KPIs for your front office team is how are they? I mean, I think it's easier to measure when we're talking about leveraging our technicians and leveraging our doctors. We're actually looking at their productivity and how many appointments they're seeing and how many services that they're performing. But that's really challenging to do for the CSR team. But this is an opportunity for us to look at that and say, let's see how our appointments are getting filled. Let's listen to some of those phone calls. Let's see how they're encouraging people to come in, and you know who's good at that and who's not, and the ones who are really good at it, let's get them to train all the rest of them
Right.
because that is a huge part of getting our medical team the work that they like to do and that they want to do, and the animals cared for that. This is the entire reason that we exist in veterinary medicine. Um, so Megan, veterinary medicine is kind of a tradition-ridden profession. It's hard for us to change. We like the status quo. How do you feel you are helping get the word out about what kind of needs to be bent in this
Hmm.
profession?
Absolutely. Well, I mean, I do that a lot through social media, through, some of the speaking events that I do. So, and then on my website as well. So people can always find me on my website or on my LinkedIn profile.
Okay. Yeah, you've been doing a lot of neat videos on LinkedIn. So thank you for those. I've
Thank you.
appreciated them. And I think that's something absolutely could encourage people to do is to follow you and listen to what you have to say on LinkedIn. Thinking about who has influenced your thinking the most, who would you say out there in the world has been most influential to you and your mindset and the way that you approach your work?
Hmm. Well, I don't know if I can identify a single person. I think, I've taken a lot through, my corporate experience, the practice experience, and just integrated things and kind of found my way. I know that's kind of maybe a cliche answer, but I can't point to necessarily one person. I've had a lot of advisors and mentors throughout my career, and I think they shaped and influenced the person you see before you today.
Mhm. Yeah, I'm the same way. I feel like my network is my advisory group, and even having a little mastermind group because we do have what we laughingly call ourselves the hens. But once a month we have a meeting and we talk about the things that we're seeing out there in the world of veterinary medicine, and we all have a little bit different perspective on that. And you mentioned earlier that having different perspective instead of getting, just keeping in your little tunnel vision is going to be very valuable to you. And the other part of it is it doesn't always have to be veterinary medicine. We can look at retail, we can look at hospitality, we can look at human health
Mhm.
and pick the best of those things to bring into our profession and certainly avoid the worst. Let's try to do that. And to try to be, more helpful to our clients and our patients and our teams, which ultimately will help our practices grow and be all that they can
Absolutely.
be. Yeah. So thank you very much for spending some time with us today. And if people are interested in getting in touch with you, tell us. I mean, we're going to put all this in the show notes, your website, your email information, so people can contact you. But tell us a little bit about, the name of your business and the website so people can find you.
Certainly, I appreciate it. So the website is connectveterinary.consulting.com. And or you can find me on my LinkedIn profile and send me a DM there. So I think we talked about it a little bit, but I share insights regularly on growth, retention, and sustainability in veterinary medicine.
Well, thank you again very much. And again, to the audience, we really appreciate you joining us today for The Bend. If today's episode sparked a new idea or inspired your next move, share it with a friend, leave us a review, or tag me on social at Debbie Boone, CVPM. I'd love to hear how you are bending the profession for the better. And we'll continue to interview the people of veterinary medicine who are working to make change and improve our profession for the better. So thanks again, Megan. I appreciate your time. Thank you to the audience for this episode of The Bent.